not final. We're looking for feedback, and then ultimately I'm gonna bring it back to the board, so that way we can really flush it out and create a structure that'll be we'll be able to duplicate and other chapters that we eventually create around the country. So this is really looking at us as a national organization, right? So, and then also there's certain like responsibilities that each of these groups will have, and I haven't fully gone into that here because we need to do that with the board, and I also want to get your feedback to bring to the board, right? So, let's get one of Danielle's stickies. Can I borrow a sticky?
Yeah, it's in the office.
Okay.
Say hi, everyone.
Hello.
Everybody wave.
We miss you.
Wave to the folks who
So,
couldn't stay.
what we'll do is I'm going to, if someone else could write, I'll go through each of it at first, and then we'll go back and identify what do we think their role should, what do we think their things that they should be, decision making that they should have.
Alright, so what's the head?
Okay, so the first one is the CEO. So I'm just gonna go through the whole organizational structure. So I'm just gonna go through the whole thing first, and then I'll go back and break up each one for conversation discussion, okay? So nothing for right now. Okay. So first, our organization starts off with the CEO, and then underneath the CEO is the board of directors. And the president is in charge of the whole board of directors. So within the board of directors, there's a secretary, treasurer, a network elected rep, a CEO appointed network rep, and then the board of elected members. Now, that's one governing body for the organization. And then there's also the advisory council. The advisory council serves on a one-on-one basis as a group of experts. For instance, we'll give Danielle as an example, an expert in advocacy. Say we wanted to reach out to her and ask her for advice and things like that. So they serve in that one-on-one role, either with myself, the board, or individual members as needed. Then we also have the regional directors, because again, we want to make this, we want to have other chapters, so we're going to grow into this. We don't have all of these pieces yet that I'm about to talk about, but we have the other two. So it would be regional directors, because we have the Northeast region, we have, the West, we have the South. So we would have someone that's working with all of the chapter presidents. So this would be the Long Island chapter. Right now I'm kind of serving that role as a chapter president, but once we get new chapters, each chapter will have to have the person that's kind of being me within that chapter. Then underneath that, we have their own chapter advisory board, because we have our one for the national organization, but each region is going to need their own experts that they can tap into. And we'll still serve in that same role that the national advisors do, but this will be localized for the region. And then underneath those, you have your chapter committee chair. So chapter advisory boards is more off with the chapter presidents, but you have your chapter committee chairs. And then under that, you have your members, partners, and co-hosts. So that's kind of how that structure is. The CEO provides leadership for the organization, ensures that chapters are in line with the mission and goals. The board of directors governs the organization's operations and finances. Membership, which is you all facilitate and execute the programmatic work and provides feedback. And the advisory council provides expert guidance and advice when we need it.
I don't understand membership.
So, what do you mean that you don't
We're the
understand
membership.
membership?
What?
We're the membership.
Oh, okay.
So, looking at the CEO, what would be your recommendations on what the decision-making power of the CEO, and this is the things that you can write down. What would be your recommendations when it comes to providing leadership for the organization, ensuring chapters are in line with the mission and goals? Is there anything in particular that you want to make sure when the board is taking a look at it all that they're thinking of? Yes, Rita.
This is high levels. Strategic direction, what does that mean? Like, for example, responsibility for ensuring the solvency, as it were, of the organization. So constantly looking out for strategic partnerships, strategic funding opportunities. Yeah, I'll leave it there for right now.
Okay.
Strategic direction, strategic, seeking out, strategic partners and funding.
I actually might see that as the responsibility of the board of directors, and the CEO is really just the spokesperson,
Yeah.
right? So the quote unquote face, making sure that the message is unified, but in terms of like the strategic decision making, I don't think that should be left to one person. I think that that's more of a board.
I agree. I didn't mean decision making, I meant the direction.
Outhouse, in-house. The CEO is the outhouse, so to speak, of the face of the public, and is the sort of firewall between the public and the functioning within the organization, to ensure that those regional directors, board of directors, advisory council can still function and do what they're supposed to do based on the vision of the organization, and that the CEO is there to sort of carry all that,
Big part of a CEO's job is, like you said, being the spokesperson and the fundraiser.
and the face, yeah.
So this is the inward looking and this is the outward looking? Okay.
Well, that would mean the CEO interfaces with the public through media,
Right.
things like that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but would the CEO, the board of directors nationally be providing strategic direction, similar to what we were discussing with the three different areas of focus, advocacy and events and program and the youth council? Would they be deciding that and then pushing that out to the regional directors and then the chapters, or would the chapters be the ones coming up with their strategic?
So technically, and the way nonprofits, work, it would be your board of directors. Now, each local area may have one thing they want to add to it because that's hyper local to their region. So like a lot of this framework I've actually taken from Mocha Moms because it's successful, it works, and it's really good, and even Jack and Jill too, and I'm sure other organizations utilize it too. So you have your initiatives that comes from your national board. So regardless of what you do all year, you have to do those national initiatives. Now, if you want to add in things because this is hyper local to your region, as long as it's aligned with the mission and the principles of the organization, you'll be welcome to do that.
Okay, so the other role of the board of directors is governance, right?
Yes,
Accountability.
governance. And finance, governance of finance too. Organizational operations and finance. And I see Rita's hand.
Okay.
Well, boards usually can't do operations and finance, they're people who do that, who report to.
They're responsible for the financial operations of the organization. You have your treasurer within the board that's overlooking and making sure you're on point, you're in line, where you're
Yes.
spending and approving of the
Yes.
annual budget.
The board is liable.
Yeah.
Yes.
The operational duties, the operations of the finances are carried out
on staff level,
Staff.
not
Right,
by the
yeah.
board, not
Right,
just,
right.
so this is about governance accountability.
Right,
Regarding strategy, operations, finance, all that, right?
Right.
So governance accountability,
Rita.
just so it's clear.
So on this chart, I always thought that the board and CEO should be on the same level and not the board underneath the CEO, because from what I understand,
Yeah,
effectively,
you're right.
like, the board is the boss of the
Yeah.
CEO.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Right.
you're right, we gotta switch that.
Yeah, the board hires,
Yeah.
essentially hires.
It
the
depends
CEO.
on if it's an executive board or an executive, like if the CEO is the executive.
Right,
Like
isn't that what
some
this is?
nonprofits, the board is the executive board, they're the boss of the director. Other organizations, the executive director, they're still accountable to the board, but I don't actually
The
know
way
how to
I-
say that
the
out
way-
loud.
So then what is this? So
Who
what
has
are
the
we?
final say?
So
CEO,
it depends,
Is
Oh, the
CEO
CEO.
has the final say?
the CEO, but the board president, working with the board
The board
president.
holds the CEO.
So,
accountable.
right,
No, but
so
Right.
it depends
Right, the
on
board holds the CEO accountable.
which kind of nonprofit you are.
Yeah.
So the one that we are
Is
is,
a 501c3.
and then in
No,
five oh one
so
C
the-
three.
There's 501c3, there's a board of directors, and the executive director is the
Yeah.
highest level managerial position, but it's answerable to the board.
So what you're saying, there's a board of directors.
Yeah.
The board of directors, and then there's the executive
Yes.
director.
So, to clarify that, so the board of directors is the one that has the final say of anything that's being done in the organization?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and
It's a
no.
mixture.
Ba-
Because the
generally-
CEO is on the board too.
Yeah,
Generally
But it's just one
speaking,
vote.
It's the board.
Right.
okay,
No,
so, whoa, time out. That's two different positions. So
Okay.
the executive director is not necessarily on the board of directors, but he can hold a second position on the board of directors. It's not prohibited from being on the board of directors. That's a flexibility piece.
Okay.
But for
Right.
clarification, we don't have
We
an
don't have
executive
executive.
director named, we have, or
It's-
role, we
Well,
have
we're
a
using,
CEO
we're
role.
using,
CEO,
so here it
right,
says
right.
CEO and president,
Right.
so.
So we're using CEO and executive director interchangeably,
In this conversation, yes.
So-
but should we be?
Right, that's what I want clarification.
You want
I
clarity, Erica?
there won't be an executive director, they'll just be the CEO.
Okay,
Okay,
But I still need clarification
yeah,
on whether
right.
the power of the CEO means the CEO can have the absolute final say regardless of what the board of directors comes up with. That's.
I mean, that's not what I think.
So,
It should know, because
No,
so generally
Right? It's the
speaking,
board of directors.
when you have a nonprofit organization, the
It's your board.
CEO is running the organization on a day-to-day basis. Once the bigger decisions have been made in collaboration with the board,
Right.
then the CEO runs those operations on a day-to-day basis
Right.
and carries them out.
I get
Right.
And then from that point forward, the board of directors acts as an oversight,
Right.
has an
Yeah.
oversight role over that.
Right.
Okay, so, for example, the last organization I was at, small organization, we're not huge, we don't have a separate HR department, things like that, right? So there was a personnel issue. So the boss, to some extent, the executive director, CEO, he's making the personnel decisions on a daily basis. Who's gonna hire, who's he gonna fire, who's he gonna lay off because there isn't enough money. But he does that consultation with the board of directors, and if he runs into a sticky situation, then you definitely go to the board of directors, and you definitely consult your legal counsel.
Right.
So it's not a free-for-all.
But
There are accountability structures and there's laws around things like labor.
if the CEO
Right.
doesn't like what the board of directors has come up with, does the CEO have the right to invalidate the decision of the board? That's my
No.
question.
no,
No.
no.
Has that ever happened? Like,
No.
I've never seen
No,
that type
so-
of-
So we've, we usually.
Because we collaborate together, the conversations are together, the CEO is at the board meetings,
so
bringing
happy.
these things.
I've never seen that.
Right, so these kinds of, so Abby, you're right, you're talking about an extreme situation that does happen, and then there's a power struggle in those organizations, and then like we saw with the NRA and Ollie North, someone wins and someone loses. I mean, that's like a whole nother piece of the puzzle. But generally speaking, everybody's working towards the same mission and in the same direction.
Right. And technically, the board president would almost serve as like my boss in essence. Because, but although we're all working together for the same purposes, and I'm executing things that we've come to a decision with the board and input from our members.
Right. And then the board president is elected by the board.
Yes.
The board
Yes.
elects its own president.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, that's law. Right.
Right.
Okay?
But also, there are decisions that the CEO can make without
Right.
necessarily going to the board.
Right.
You don't go to the board for every
Right,
single little
right.
thing. That would
Within,
stop.
within the
that would
parameters of the
stop
strategic
everything.
How is
Exactly.
that defined?
So that's something that the board will define.
Yeah.
So how
And that's why
is
we're
that
asking for
defined?
feedback now. Is there things that you think that we should definitely be looking at when we're defining that as a board?
I have some
And share, now is the time to share. We have a board meeting in July.
So,
Our
so
first
just
one.
to clarify for Abby, just to clarify. So there's a whole bunch of, there's state law about all of this, also that we have to fit within, right? So in order to qualify as a nonprofit organization. So these groups will follow whatever those laws are. So for example, the CEO in collaboration with the staff comes up with a budget for the year that aligns with the strategic goals that were previously outlined. That budget then goes to the board for review, tweaking, and approval, and then that budget goes back to the CEO and the staff, and they execute that budget based on the group decision-making process. So it's a whole circle. Right, and then at the end of the year, the board of directors audits that year's performance. They do performance audits on the CEO, and they do a financial audit by actually hiring an outside auditor, for example.
Correct.
So there's a whole cycle of plan, execute, feedback, assess, plan, execute, feedback, assess.
And we're gonna be working with the pro bono partnership, something on this.
Thank you.
All the things we have to make sure that we do by law. All right, moving on.
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
What are the terms for your board members, and what if your membership has an issue with a board member?
So the terms for the board is 3 years. 3 years, and if they have an issue with the board member, you speak to the CEO with that. Or the
So
board
that-
chair.
That we should
The
have
board chair.
a grievance process.
So, yes, you need a whole set of,
Yeah, there should be a grievance process.
And the board, but just to clarify, there's 9 right now?
Yes.
So you want to, they're all being appointed today, but we should probably stratify those, so that every year it's 3 board members are, 3 to 4
So
board members are up.
we
Not
were
the
gonna
whole
do,
board at once.
right, I think what we said was there was gonna be a couple that have to volunteer. We want to start with our WDN reps and maybe 2 other board members that would serve a 2-year term. So that way it staggers it that way. I had a consultation with Jennifer Rutledge, who focuses and specializes in board development. And I have tons of tips and strategies and things that we need to make sure we're doing and all of that stuff from her. And she's readily available anytime we need to work with her. So, that's there. All right, so we're gonna move on from the board. I think the officers is pretty intuitive, right? With secretary, treasurer, and so forth. Okay, so we have our regional directors. And they would be in charge of like basically all the presidents in the Northeast. They would be working with them, providing more so with providing support and advice to these presidents and convening things on a regional level.
So they would deal with the compliance of the different regions
Yes,
to the vision and the
yes,
caveats to the
yes.
above.
Yep. So compliance is a good one to put under regional directors. anything else we feel like we wanna make sure it's included for the regional directors, and I'm sorry that we're over time.
And just from experience out at Planned Parenthood, we have regional campaign directors, and so they are very helpful in helping in more like state guidance. So like while they know the region as a whole, they're also very specialized in like state government of each of the states that are in their region, so they can help guide the chapter that's in that area. So I'm not sure if this is also what you're
Statutory
thinking.
statutory
Well,
obligation.
specific to their.
Or just like guidance, like, cause this is their experience.
Is that a separate position, you're saying, or is it?
No, just like, is
So
that something
So the
that?
regional directors need to have, expertise in on state level for their region?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, state level
Like, they
expertise.
need to know the,
Right.
or learn the areas.
Well, let's take those paper, right?
Oh, that's okay.
Alright, that's good.
Anything else for regional directors? Leadership, providing leadership support. Okay, so we go next to the chapter presidents. So the chapter president is like really responsible for each chapter's day-to-day operations. And the CEO is too, but more on a national level, and so the CEO would be working a lot with the chapter presidents themselves. And the chapter presidents would then be working with the members of each chapter. Anything else we want to include for chapter presidents? They would be appointing the committee chairs.
Do you think that, I guess I'm just asking a question of, does the chapter president appoint the committee chairs, or do the members vote on committee chairs?
So, the way I've been doing it is everyone volunteers to be a committee chair, and then based on skills, based on, diversity and things like that is how I've been appointing them. And I think I like that model. I don't know if you all disagree, but it's really the chapter president being intentional about the committees and the committee assignments.
Can members suggest or like recommend, and rather than self-selection?
I don't see why not.
Cause I definitely understand and appreciate the, you being the one to kind of see who might be best to fit this role. I also think there's power in, having membership kind of suggest who might be a good person.
That's, yeah, sure. We can add that to the list. Do you suggest anyone else? Sure.
I agree with that.
Sure.
Because, we are fashioning ourselves as a different type of organization, more inclusive, not necessarily having to follow models that quite frankly have been born out of the patriarchy, the white patriarchy. So any opportunity that we have to be inclusive and show who and what we are is great.
And you might meet somebody that we don't know anything about, and that's a good recommendation.
Yep. All right, anything else for chapter presidents? Okay, I'm gonna move down to chapter committee chairs, because the advisory board,
Can I
council,
actually
same
make,
thing.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking
No,
up a
go
lot of
ahead, this
space.
is the time for that.
Go for it.
Just purely from like a organizational chart structure, the chapter advisory board, I think, needs to be next to the chapter president in working consultation, because the chart makes it seem like the
Well,
committee
yeah, I
chairs
stated that a
report
little
to-
while ago.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I
might
did,
have-
no problem.
Okay, I'm sorry, so what's the
You're
next
good.
point
Yep.
here?
Chapter committee chairs.
Actually, I have a point on that too, so we'll just take up space together. The chapter advisory boards, I was thinking what about just having it as a regional advisory board? Because with chapter advisory boards, it may become too onerous, and maybe you're tapping into the same people. So you keep that advisory board at the regional level for the
Like
whole region.
Like statewide, like
Well-
have advisory boards sort of for the regional, yeah.
The region would be the north, like for instance, the northeast region. But each state has different demographics.
Oh, so I guess it depends on how big the region is, so, okay.
Yeah. But maybe
Because
a
I'm just-
state
so if-
advisory board then, a
Right, so
state
if I'm,
advisory board.
but if I'm thinking about Long Island, for example, as a region, each chapter wouldn't necessarily need a advisory board because you might have those same people on the, you know what
And
I
see,
mean?
Long Island wouldn't be a region, Long Island would be a chapter, Queens would be a chapter.
Got it.
And maybe it's, I mean, in Mocha Moms, we do have state directors also. And those state directors responsible to the region, but I think it gets to be a lot and people don't step up and
Very, very-
volunteer.
But is
We
there
can
a regional
aspire to be
hub?
that complicated.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, well,
But is
no.
there an overall, but there's an overall, right, that oversees all the regions?
Yeah, so that's
That's
the,
That's
yeah,
at
the
the
top, the president, the,
Right, no, I
our
understand
CEO.
that, so, okay, so, all right.
The
So
CEO.
Long Island would just, because originally when you talked about it, you said the Long Island would be the hub and then everybody else would be.
yeah, well, this will be our national, this will
That's
serve
good.
as our national,
Okay.
you know, things, and we're setting up that way, Long Island, but we gotta think in the larger picture too.
No,
So,
I get that.
right, yeah, so, but our region would probably consist of states in the northeast, but maybe it is a state-based advisory board, as opposed to a chapter one. I like that, what do you all think?
Kind of big, isn't
I
it?
think we'll see how exciting we get.
Right, when we get more chapters.
Be a nice problem to have.
Alright, so chapter committee chairs,
Chapter committee chairs,
um,
we're back down at our level.
right. So this is, you know, like executing the different programmatic areas we've identified, like the advocacy, the summit, you know, really responsible for the activities of the chapter. Any thoughts or suggestions for chapter committee chairs on what you really want them, make sure that it's included that they're responsible for? Nope, and if they're not, well, it's okay, the board will break it down. Okay, moving on. So members, partners, and co-hosts, you know, is kind of,
Actually, I could turn it
doing the, you know, executing the daily work, you know, giving them manpower, recruiting new members, and stuff like that. I think that we might not need another one, because we're done.
over. Okay, no, are we gonna, I was just wondering, are we gonna refer, we need to refer back, otherwise we'll just flip it over.
Oh, yeah. Right, so members, partners, and co-host. And, I think we really need to figure out this co-host relationship, and what does that mean, and what does that really look like in our partners, and I intended on doing that with the board, but just from what we saw is working or not working now with having these business partners and co-hosts, is there any, advice you'd like to give for this role?
Can you explain what a co-host is?
So, for instance, Planned Parenthood is a co-host. So they co-host our events
Got it.
and stuff, and then they also have the option to provide members to come and do the, to be part of the network.
Got it.
Partners are basically organizations that pay money, and co-hosts are organizations that don't pay money.
Yeah, but you send people to it to do the manpower.
So there's a difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit.
Got it.
So you're giving the co-host an option to either send a member, co-host an event, or do both? Are you asking that they, in order to be a co-host, you must do?
In order to be a co-host, you have to co-host the summit. You have to have people that are coming and helping plan the summit and things like that. They don't have to, they can choose to co-host our other events that we have. But if they're co-hosts, they have to send members to at least our committee meetings. The member then can choose if they also wanna come to the full network meetings. but at least the committee meetings.
So what's the bullet point here? Right, members, partners.
So, that's what we're putting back out to you. Is there anything else that we wanna make sure that they know, like outreach is a key piece there? Anything else you all wanna add? Nope, okay. So, are there any questions overall about the structure, any feedback that you wanna give, anything? Now is the time, before we bring it back to the board. Go ahead, Rita.
Rita taking up space.
Oh,
For each one, my recommendation is to have sort of like a decision-making model at every level, just for clarity, expectation setting, people know, what they can and
Right,
what they're empowered to do.
I mean, like committee chair, things like that.
No, I
Who
mean,
has
even
the-
within such, who makes spending decisions, who makes hiring, firing decisions, who makes thematic decisions, who makes partnership decisions, things like that. And how,
Process map.
yeah.
Yeah, process, set process, no matter who's in there, you gotta have a framework.
Yep. So we can put process mapping on there to make sure that, and that could just go, anyways, that goes within everything that we have to do. Any other comments or feedback? All right, oh, you want to say something?
No, it's just a thought, cause, I was working with an organization and they decided to rebrand their organization, so who makes, say if you decide that you wanna add something different, is that a discussion had with the board of directors and CEO and
Yes.
and it goes
But
down?
we are always, like, I'm very feedback driven, so this will always, you'll always have an opportunity to provide feedback. Or if there's something that you'd like to do, to share it with us, and then I go back and have this conversation with the board of directors. That's why you have member reps on the board. So you can go and speak to your member reps, and they would come to the board meeting and say, hey, my members really want this, or really want our organization to do this, and then the board of directors would have that conversation about if it makes sense for our organization to take that on as a whole, or let that just be something regional to you all. Or, let me. Or not do
When
it.
you say member reps,
Mhm.
what do you mean?
So you all elected who your member reps were that were gonna be on the board. So they are from the network, and they will be on the national board. And those are people that like you can reach out to if you have like suggestions or feedback or whatever it is, because they're on the board, but they're a representation of you all and what your ideas and thoughts are.
I know you are, Rita. That's why I can sleep at night.
And Cynthia will be joining after her nuptials. Erica.
So,
Yes,
going
yes.
forward in this sort of big vision where there's lots of chapters, all the members of all the chapters would vote on a single national rep?
No, it'd be a rep from each chapter, right?
No.
No,
That
but
was
then you
my
have a
question.
board
Yes.
that would
No.
have,
Yep.
800 people.
Yeah, they would vote and like, they would
so
vote on
everybody
that.
would be voting for one
Two, well, yes, one.
national rep, cause then
Yep.
you appoint one
Yes.
from all of the members throughout the
Yep,
country, world,
Yep.
universe,
and
galaxy.
we could have
whatever.
multiple people running, it's done all the time, so
No,
yeah.
I just wanted to
Yep.
clarify what.
Yep,
Then I think what would be helpful is in the board of directors, some type of policy that allows for a revisit of how many people are on the board, because again,
Okay.
in this dream world,
That's true.
having
I would make it regional.
20
Right, that's what I
chapters
was
vote on one person, when Long Island is super different than
Yeah.
Tennessee, which is super
Right.
different from Maine, like I
Right, so I
think.
think maybe it makes sense to have, when we get to
So,
that,
right,
we'll
so,
have a
so having
regional-
that
Okay.
flexibility to have a revisiting process.
Right.
So that the board reflects the needs of the larger organization out.
okay,
We need the
Yeah.
framework to be flexible enough to accommodate that, so you don't have to redo this whole
Yeah,
process.
the
over
revisiting
again.
is good, but I've seen it work where you have one person
Yeah.
representing
that's
an
what we did in
entire
Jack and Jill.
region,
Right.
yeah.
I was gonna second to that, I mean, if you think about what came to mind is like, how you vote for whoever is headed, like your 401k, when you get that packet in the mail and it's got the glossy pictures of all of these people who are now gonna be making decisions
Yeah.
on what
Where your
they're
money-
trading, where your money is, and
Right.
I always think to myself, I'm like, don't even know who these people are, like,
Right,
so I might throw it out. But I know there's some people who vote and send their vote
Yeah.
back in, but I think it would probably be more so.
It didn't break, it's fine.
My hand just like gave up.
Oh!
Sorry, video.